We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello, listeners, and welcome to Sisters Assembled. As you know, we are covering all things Deadpool and Wolverine still. And of course, one of the most important terms and things that we've been talking about and breaking down is the concept of the anchor being. Now, knowing what an anchor being is, naturally, the questions have become and the conversation has surrounded, who do we think the anchor being of 616 is? So that's going to be the topic today. We are going to each bring two characters, dead or alive, that we think have a shot at being the anchor being of 616. So now that we've set it up for you, Katie, go with your first person.
Okay, my first person I feel really good about, and that's Doctor Strange. I'm not sure anybody should be too surprised about this. I feel like Doctor Strange is one of those that's like leading the charge of the multiverse saga, so I think that in itself puts him pretty high up on that list. He's been involved in, other than Deadpool and Wolverine, the two other big multiversal projects. Oh, well, and the exception of Loki, but I kind of have to remove that mentally because of we don't even know when that takes place. But the other two huge multiversal projects, MOM and of course No Way Home, and playing extremely pivotal parts, obviously MOM being his technically sequel, but he was huge in No Way Home as well. I also think when you know the direction we're going, I think it makes a lot of sense to be naming Doctor Strange as the anchor being of 616. Additionally, I think it's been proven that a lot of Doctor Stranges across the entire multiverse suck. And we just happen to have one that doesn't, which to me sticks out like a sore thumb. So maybe, just maybe, that makes him our anchor being.
I hear you, and I also had Doctor Strange at one point on my list before we coordinated pre us hitting the button to record. So I don't disagree on the Doctor Strange. I will say, though, I think with Doctor Strange, to your last point about our Doctor Strange not sucking, it's not that he sucks, but it is that Doctor Strange is a slippery slope, right? He always thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's doing the wrong thing. Like, the ends justify the means with him, right? Like, that's always kind of been his thing. And it's especially visible with a lot of the Doctor Stranges around the multiverse. If you look at the Illuminati universe, what is that, 838? Like, that one is an especially good example. I think even Defender Strange, ends justify the means. He tried to kill America. So, you know, I think what we're seeing is he did some stuff at the end of MOM that, again, ends justify the means, hence the third eye. He was kind of bending some rules. I don't know that our Doctor Strange is special. He just might not be far enough on his descent journey yet that we see the consequences of what he's done. I mean, Clea told us he started an incursion. We don't know exactly what he did to trigger that, but she blames him specifically. So clearly his actions are starting to have consequences. Like I said, I don't disagree. I do disagree on that point in particular, but I want to replace that point with a point for him, which is that when Benedict Cumberbatch got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Kevin Feige, our Lord and Savior, was one of the speakers, honoring him in his career. And Kevin used a very specific term when he talked about Benedict and his work as Doctor Strange, and he called him the anchor. And I feel like that is telling because Kevin does not exactly let things slip. Kevin chooses his words very carefully. And for Kevin to call Benedict the anchor, I think helps show that the executives and the producers see him as that linchpin. So it might have actually given a little bit of a hint into how they view him and his role within the MCU and specifically the multiversal story.
You just wanted to steal my thunder by sharing that because that was still on my list to share. So thank you for that
You're
because
welcome.
you're annoying. Anyway, yes, that is also something I was going to share when Taylor was done making her other point. But now that she stole that from me because she actually had Doctor Strange on her list because she didn't listen to me last time.
I listened, I just forgot.
Okay, that's not fair. And then you're stealing my points. Like, that's not fair. Anyway, it is a fair point, though. He did use that wording. Keep in mind, by that time, we had already had Deadpool and Wolverine confirmed. So it is very possible that the idea of the anchor being was already being talked about as well, which is what gives that a little bit more merit on top of it just having an interesting word choice in itself. But to go to kind of what you were saying before about his descent, fair points there. The only thing I'm going to say there is kind of not to exactly what you were saying, but kind of to build on top of it. And that's to say, this Doctor Strange is heavily involved. And you're kind of saying, he can make the wrong choice still, and he can still have the slippery slope. And I don't disagree. But this Doctor Strange, we cannot forget, was brought in to specifically be in Infinity War. Let us all not forget that. He was brought in prior to Infinity War specifically so he played the part that he played in Infinity War. That was the point. He needed to see the possibilities. He needed to do all of that. So not only did the entirety of the Infinity Saga end up hinging on Loki him because of that, but now the whole multiversal saga might also be completely on his back, as you were saying, to everything Cleo was saying. And maybe he doesn't make all the right decisions. But, negating my first point, maybe he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to be the world's best person. He doesn't have to be Earth 10005's Logan. And even let's be fair, that Logan didn't make every correct decision ever. He didn't. But he made a great sacrifice at the end of the day. And that's what he's remembered for. So Doctor Strange doesn't need to be perfect Doctor Strange to still be the anchor being of 616. But the roles he's played in now both sagas, and we're not yet even done with the multiversal one, to me is what catapults him up to this list or to the top of the list and makes it very hard to knock him off of it.
Oh, I totally agree. I think to your point, he has been a central figure in both the Infinity Saga and the Multiverse Saga. And essentially, isn't that what Hugh Jackman's Wolverine was doing in every single X-Men movie? If we're going to go for that direct comparison to the one person that we know is a confirmed anchor being, he was central in all of those stories. He was the only one getting his own spin-off movies. Like, when you think about the Fox X-Men universe, who's the person you think of immediately? It's maybe Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. Maybe. I'll give it to them. But it's nobody. Okay, also Halle Berry because she's a star. But like, other than those three, the real person, the breakout from that original universe is Wolverine. And if you think about all of the important roles he played in that story, bringing in Rogue, all of that, the mirror here, there's one other mirror who we'll talk about in a second, but there's the mirror here in this universe in 616 is Doctor Strange.
Exactly. And that's why, like I said, I think it's very hard to dethrone him from the top of the list here. I think there are plenty of people, including my second pick, including I'm sure your two, that make the list for a reason, but I don't think I could put them first.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's Doctor Strange number one for sure. And I kind of hinted at my first person a couple minutes ago when I was talking about, who's the face of the Fox universe. Well, I'm of course going to put in the face of the MCU, which is none other than Tony Stark / Iron Man. I think this is one that when the anchor being concept was first introduced to us in Deadpool and Wolverine, everybody was like, Tony Stark immediately, because think about it. If we want to go shot for shot parallel. Man who is the face of the universe, Wolverine. Man who is the face of the universe, Iron Man. Man whose sacrifice literally brings the universe to its knees, Wolverine. Man whose sacrifice literally brings the universe to its knees, Iron Man. So I think that's already pretty telling. I think the other thing that we need to think about, and this is a theory that I put out on our Instagram recently, is the idea that what if the death of an anchor being is actually what causes an incursion, right? We know that in some cases it leads to this long, torturous death. That's what Paradox taught us, right? But maybe that doesn't happen in every case. Maybe in some cases it actually causes an incursion. I said that maybe Doctor Strange caused that, in the 838 universe with the death of the Illuminati and bringing Wanda into all of that. But in our case, maybe our universe is already starting an incursion because our anchor being, aka Iron Man, is already dead.
What I really like about the concept of the anchor being is while guessing 616's, it can still be anybody, and this proves that because our anchor being doesn't have to be alive. As Paradox said, theoretically, 616 could go on for millions of years and not have an anchor being and then die, and it wouldn't affect us whatsoever for present day. To your theory, then, as well, though, knowing that our universe is actually having an incursion, it's running into somebody else, it's just as possible that maybe the anchor being is causing that, not having him. I think Tony is, to your point, the de facto kind of everybody assumed it was Tony as soon as that concept came out. I think there were obviously then other theories getting thrown around a little later, but immediately it was like, it has to be Tony, right? To your point, shot by shot, he fits that whole like little storyline, if you will, or plot, if you will, of what a anchor being looks like, at least to what we've seen. I'm not against it being Tony. I think I have so many weird feelings now just because RDJ is coming back.
I
So I think I
know.
feel really, really weird just being like, yeah, it's Tony, but also now RDJ is going to be Doom from another universe. So, like, that's its own thing. So, I think that's the biggest reason I have like a little ick in my mouth for that one, just because of like more off screen things. I could see it being Tony, though. And if your theory is correct, it would explain part of why, we're having an incursion. Or it's possible just losing the anchor being in general is what makes the timeline more vulnerable to incursions. So when Doctor Strange was messing around, that's how the incursion happened more easily than maybe it would have any other time.
Yeah, I want to hit on two things really quick that you mentioned in your kind of thought process. One, when it relates to RDJ and taking back or, taking on the mantle of Doctor Doom, I think this is one of the things that I was trying to get at when I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. Because think about it this way: in a perfect world where he is not playing Doctor Doom, his legacy is perfectly intact, and we can look at Tony Stark and be like, ugh, the anchor being, the one, the chosen one, the man who started it all, the Godfather, and there's no asterisk. But now he's coming back playing a different role, and now there's an asterisk because his perfect ending is ruined by the fact that he's starting or he's playing another character. So there's nothing more to say about that other than this is what my grievance was about to start with. Second thing I want to say, and that's to your theory that, an anchor being dying does make it a universe more vulnerable to incursions. I love that. I think it makes so much sense that, like, now without this, kind of tether or this important being no longer alive, that the universe is, maybe less stable. I mean, if you think about what we saw on Paradox's screen, right, with the squiggly lines, like maybe that's why they're squiggly because the anchor being is gone. And so the stability of the actual timeline or circle or whatever you want to call it itself is gone. It's questionable, it's compromised. And now in its movement, it can bump into another one next door. Whereas if it had stayed straight, that's what parallel lines do. They move forward always, but never get closer. So I love that. I think that's an interesting build.
Exactly. And I don't know if that fully helps the case of like Tony being the anchor being more than it just builds on that theory as a whole, that maybe that's a possibility. And I like that you brought up, the squiggly lines we saw behind Paradox. We really couldn't figure those out. We
Yeah.
had a whole episode talking about what did that mean because we were trying to figure out the whole multiversal aspect of it all. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's what it means. And then to your point, makes it easier for them to hit other things. Or to what I was saying, it takes a little less meddling for them to fly into another universe now because, they're already unstable and Strange is a meddler. And I know we're talking about Tony, but Strange as a whole is a meddler. And so, good chances are he would allow them to fly into another universe anyway. Moving on to my second pick, a little bit of a hot take. Not really, because I see people agree with me, but a hot take for other reasons. And that's the Scarlet Witch. And no, I'm not picking her because I love her to death and I can't wait to see her again at some point or another, although that's part of it. I first am stuck on the point that she's a Nexus being. And did we not have an entire conversation based off the fact that Kevin was like, what's really the difference between a Nexus being and an anchor being? Aren't they like kind of the same? We had an entire conversation based on that. And therefore, my entire reasoning is going to base off of that as well. If she is the Nexus being of 616, I shouldn't say the Nexus being, but a Nexus being who happens to reside in 616 as a whole, what's the difference between making her that universe's anchor being? I think that's its own reasoning in itself. I don't have a lot else to say. I know technically she's dead, but again, that doesn't really matter when it comes to an anchor being. Also, she's not actually dead. We
Let's
all
be
know
real.
that. But regardless, I think she's got some good merit for possibly being the anchor being of 616.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think in the same way that we called out Doctor Strange's love for messing with the multiverse and made that, a reason to consider him or put him at the top of the list, I think that same argument can also be used for Wanda slash the Scarlet Witch. She can either, what is the phrase? She'll either be the birth of the multiverse or the death of it or whatever. Like, is that literally not on a larger scale exactly what an anchor being is, right? Like if she died, like she could be the death of the universe. She could also be the death of the multiverse, just given the level of power that she has. So I definitely think that when it comes to, thinking about who are the truly multiversal beings, right? These beings who the multiverse and their identity are so intertwined because of either their actions or the way they've involved themselves in certain things or their powers. She is definitely right up there, right? And I definitely think that she's one of the first beings that we really saw migrating and taking things from the multiverse, right? Like when we were watching WandaVision, we were talking about the multiverse. It was the first time we were truly trying to understand that concept in any way, shape, or form. And it's evolved so much in the last, 3.5 years. But that's the first time. I don't think that's a coincidence, right? I think that's, again, another reason to think it could be her because when we're talking about the multiverse, I think, and I don't know about you, but I'm sure because you are who you are. When I think of the multiverse, I think of Wanda and I think of Doctor Strange. So
Yeah,
if we're gonna go the king of being the potential anchor being and the queen, I think you got your 1 and 2 right there.
exactly. And I also, for a slightly, and when I say this, I mean this one could fall apart because it's laying on straw. Like, this is the worst reasoning you're going to get from this, and it's got nothing to back it up. But I'm also going to add, you see the Scarlet Witch statue in Deadpool and Wolverine.
You do.
And we're not talking about that enough online. Like, I've been waiting for people to talk about that. No one. Crickets.
My gasp was audible.
No,
Audible.
same. And okay, to be fair, was quickly buried just because other things happened very quickly after that.
Yeah.
But I also was like, oh my God. And then they never showed it again. So I was like, maybe I just didn't see that. And then I saw no one talking about it. So I was like, maybe I really just made that up. I don't know. Maybe that was not what I thought it was. But that is from Wondergar. And anybody who, of course, has seen MOM knows that is the Scarlet Witch's castle. And because we know the Scarlet Witch is supposed to be an entity and not something that exists in every universe, theoretically speaking, there's only one of them. I'm not going to get into my theories on that being our Wanda's and that's how she's still alive. Not going to go there, but I will just say an interesting little tidbit to be put in there and then not really referenced to or anything else, that was the only thing we saw. And again, this idea is held up by literal straw, but I'm just saying for that to be in the movie and that to have no reference, no nothing, but it's just thrown in there to be thrown in there. Just a thought. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, there are some very strong pointers to Wanda. I think, like I said, when it comes to the multiverse, she's the queen. I don't think it is a coincidence that she was represented visually in that movie. I think there's a lot to be said there. I will now go into my second character, which is another one that's pretty popular and has really risen through the ranks. And that is, of course, Tom Holland's Peter Parker slash Spider Man. I think this one just kind of goes without saying, there's nothing that really ties him specifically to being a anchor being other than if you understand the history of Spider-Man in the comics, you know that he's Marvel's guy. Like before they sold the rights to him, and that's just for the movies, but like even in the comics, like he is one of the most popular superheroes of all time, regardless of label. Like it's him, it's Superman, it's Batman. That's the holy trinity of superheroes, right? When it comes to especially the comics. And so when you think about that, wouldn't it make sense for the guy who is classically their number one guy? Pre MCU, it was all Spider Man, let's be honest, right? Like nobody knew who Iron Man was, Thor, even Cap. They were minor characters in comparison to the juggernaut, pun not intended, that is Spider Man and that character in his lore. So I think just from a purely like meta standpoint, it makes a ton of sense. Then you think about, oh my gosh, let's talk about No Way Home and break this down, right? You've got this guy who is, I mean, yes, he wasn't doing all of the, magic around it. However, his aura, I don't know if you want to call it that, is so strong that instead of, people forgetting who he is, he actually attracted anyone who knows him to him from across the multiverse. So even though I don't personally, when I'm like multiverse, my first guy isn't Peter Parker in my head, he's still very much involved and he's still so integral to, multiverse, a very important multiversal story. I also think that despite the shenanigans with Sony, we're just going to see a continual rise in Spider-Man's importance. I know right now it's kind of tough because everybody forgot who he was, but we get to return to the basis of the character. And at the same time, I think we're going to see him become more and more central. He's going to take on potentially Kingpin in the future, link up with maybe Deadpool, with maybe Daredevil. He's going to become really central to stories the way that he should be, honestly. So I think just historically, it makes a lot of sense.
I think I struggle the most with this pick for a couple reasons. The first is I do completely see the comic kind of angle. Do I think that matches with where the MCU is itself, though, today? No. So I think that's where that one falls off. I like your point, and I think it makes sense. Do I think, though, he's in that position in the MCU? I don't. As for the other end of it, I struggle a lot because you kind of were setting up for the reason why you were setting up, Spider-Man 4, and yeah, he's been forgotten, but now all this other stuff is coming his way. That's the reason I'm actually going to say, like, I feel like I agree with it even less because Spider-Man 4, he is supposed to be going ground level. And I understand that an anchor being doesn't necessarily have to be involved in the multiverse and doesn't need to be like this huge, prominent, whatever. Let's be real. Wolverine from the OG Fox universe didn't travel the universe or the multiverse and wasn't doing all this wild magic. I understand that. I think for me though, his impact on his universe to me is not quite matched to that of Spider-Man in ours yet. And so I think because I'm not sure of that yet, also, I'm not quite sure if an anchor being is going to be super important yet or not. And I think that's just across the board something we have to all kind of take that step back and consider of this could just be another term. I mean, we've been sitting on Nexus being for like 3.5 years, to your point, since WandaVision. And what do we have to say for that? We know the Scarlet Witch itself is a Nexus being. We know America Chavez is a Nexus being. And then what else? Like, that's about all we have. So, we could sit on anchor being for the next 3.5 years as well, and really nothing comes to that. Or it could end up being an integral part of the whole rest of the saga. We aren't really sure. So I think that debate kind of happening also has me like, I don't quite see this Peter Parker being the anchor being if it's a very prominent role. If it's just holding down the fort, I'm like, okay, I can understand your reasoning. I don't love it. I wouldn't put him on my personal list, but I can understand why you picked him.
Yeah, I hear you. I definitely think when it comes to like, let's rank 1 through 4, he definitely hits at 4 for me. But I did want to include him because when I looked online, a lot of what I was seeing was okay, it's Spider Man. It's definitely got to be Spider Man. I think, like I said, because of his history in the comics of being that guy. So I definitely just wanted to bring up, something that was really prominent in the online conversation. I will say one note in his favor that I forgot about until you were talking was we talked about how important Tony Stark's sacrifice is in terms of giving him bonus points essentially for being the anchor being. We would be remiss in saying or not saying that the reason he did that was because of Peter Parker. So if you want to peel that onion back one layer, if you're talking about who's going to actually affect the universe most, yes, Tony's the one who made the sacrifice, but without Peter Parker, that sacrifice is never made. That they're never going back in time.
Okay, but I'm going to play devil's advocate, your favorite thing to do to me, and say, with that exact reasoning, why wouldn't X-23 then be her anchor being?
Touche.
Gotcha.
Touche. That's annoying. All right, whatever. Look, I love the guy, and I wanted to put one out there for someone who's really risen to a lot of, a high point in a lot of the conversation. Like I said, in terms of like, if I'm ranking this list, he's not my highest for sure, but worth a mention. Speaking of people who are worth a mention, I saw an article and I want to give one honorable mention. I was only allowed two this episode, but I do want to give one honorable mention to T'Challa's Black Panther. An article pointed out that him being the 616 anchor being is the perfect way to honor Chadwick and make him, forever this important being to the universe, the same way that Tony would have been, even though it's obviously a very different between an on-screen death and an off-screen death. It's similar in the sense that like that character lives forever and is held, on a different pedestal at a different level than maybe some other characters, that it could be a nice way to kind of honor Chadwick, to say, okay, we're going to make you our anchor being, and your death is actually going to, be what brings us into this next kind of big culminating moment as an honor and a thank you to him.
The only thing I'll say to that is I like it as an outside viewer. I think as far as in universe, it comes back to what I was kind of saying, just based off of if anchor beings are going to be super important or kind of just figureheads. I think in universe, that's still the question regarding that. But as a viewer itself, I think that would be something that would be really touching for a lot of us, especially those who have been around since he made his debut and then obviously watched him in his subsequent movies and then are no longer able to watch him play that role, which he was amazing at. I think it'd be a really nice way to, your point, honor him.
Yeah. Alrighty, well, I think this is it in terms of just a little bit of thoughts around who could be the anchor being. To Katie's point, we may find out in a year, we may find out in 2 years, we may find out in 6 who the anchor being is of 616, or we may never find out because it's not actually that important. But I'd like to think that it has meaning, and that's why they gave us the term. So, with that being said, here are our top 4 picks as of right now. This could evolve over time, and we will definitely circle back to it if it does. But if you are looking forward to any of our future coverage as it relates to anchor beings, the multiverse saga, and the upcoming movies and shows that are slated for the next few months, please make sure that you are following on your podcast platform of choice. Also, make sure you're checking out the website link below and bookmarking it. Great thing to check out for all things related to the show. Just a hub. Make sure that you're checking that regularly.
You guys can also follow us on all of our socials, which are linked below in the show notes. So go ahead and give us a follow on all one of them, whatever you want, just to keep up with us and the show. Next week, believe it or not, we are starting our Agatha coverage. So we are going to start by doing kind of a character study. We do know that there are quite a few new characters getting introduced in the show, so we are going to break down some of the big ones that we've never seen before, kind of talk about who their comic book counterparts are, or if they're new, who they might be. And so make sure you guys are joining us for that, because we're really excited for Agatha, and we're really excited that we're also starting it already. So we will see you guys next week for that one. And as always, Marvel just blew your mind, so let's talk about it.